Hello everybody, this is Harper with something very different, although it's a game I've showed off before. This is Dissidia, Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. It is a mobile game, an RPG. As a heads up, it is a gacha game. I do play gachas. I play this and I play Genshin Impact. And the normal disclaimers apply, which is to say that even gacha, games that I find are generous, like Dissidia, their systems and sometimes the way that their events are constructed, I'll talk about that with this event, exist to encourage players to participate in gacha roles to try and get the characters that they need or characters that they like. If it were up to me, things like loot boxes and gacha games would be subject to very specific regulation, or perhaps even banned or eliminated. As it stands, I am a hypocrite who does play gacha games. This is a new type of difficulty for events called Lufenia Plus. I'll explain what all that means in a minute. Let me talk about the opening of this fight. I just called in the Warrior of Light to do an ability that will give us shields because the enemy is guaranteed to attack us for a minute. You see where that A is on the turn marker? It means that we can't delay them. It means they're guaranteed to attack. I'm also doing something very specific with Setzer. Anytime I'm calling in that airship, I'm giving my characters the ability to use something called rainbow damage. It's fabulous. It means that when they hit, they have a chance to do extra damage that ignores mitigation. There are two systems at play. Also, watch here. We got some delays, and the next time I use that attack, Zidane will be able to delete the enemy's turn. But getting back to rainbow damage, there are two systems at play when it comes to how damage is handled in Dissidia. You have a resource called Brave, which you can generate sometimes just by normal attacks or by specifically attacking to get more Brave. I'm stumbling over my words a little. That's that bar down there, where the characters are. X number out of a certain percentage. Look at this. We're going to delete that enemy's turn. Isn't that fun? Really lets us focus on attacking because we need to do a lot of damage really quickly. I have 65 turns to win this. But Brave, you build up the resource and then you spend Brave in order to do damage. So Rainbow damage allows us to hit that Brave count quicker. It ignores pretty much all forms of enemy like Brave reduction, damage mitigation. It will make sure that we do a lot more damage. What you saw there from Zidane is something called a burst. Bursts come in two flavors. There's a normal burst, which allows you to go through pretty much all your attacks at least once, and you can do a lot of damage. I can't even talk right now. I have no script, you can tell. I've upgraded Zidane to the point where he can just use the finisher, and it will grant a few benefits. One of those benefits is that now anytime Zidane attacks, for a certain period of time anyway, he will steal an elixir from the opponent that will give us more Brave, which therefore means more damage. But the big star of the event is Cid Raines. Cid Raines, a character from Final Fantasy XIII that no one remembers. This event is technically based around him. And in Dissidia, he is one of the most powerful characters in the entire game. Now I'm calling in certain characters to put debuffs on the enemy that will allow us to do more damage. But let's talk about Cid. Cid's big thing is that some attacks will launch enemies into the air, like this. Launching enemies into the air is going to be very important for this fight. But Cid, if he does an attack that launches the enemy into the air, he has a buff, which is called something along the lines of, I too will challenge my fate. And as long as you have that buff up on Cid, whenever you initiate an attack that launches, which is basically all of his attacks, he will do a finisher attack at the end that does a lot of damage. And it's going to do even more damage because it is rainbow damage thanks to Setzer, which means he's ignoring a lot of damage mitigation, a lot of Brave reduction from the enemy. So when he does finishers right now, it's very strong. Why do I care about Brave reductions? Well, I'll talk about that in a second, but let's talk about that orb. Lufenia, when it first came out, just plain Lufenia, were tough missions And then they had this orb, which you can see by the enemy, that big glowy pink nonsense. What orbs do is they count down to 0 every time a turn passes, and every time a character takes an action, it starts to go down by a count of 1 down to 0. If it reaches 0, they will instantly kill the party. In order to prevent the orb from reaching 0, each battle has special conditions that you need to meet. For instance, launching the boss into the air here means I increase the count by 1. But if I do 250k damage during that launch period, I actually increase the orb count by 8. This means that I can keep the orb generally around like 14 to 12, depending on turn order. Later on, it's going to get harder to manage, and we'll get probably down to like 8 or 6 or something. It's pretty scary. So the thing that I like about the orbs is that it's another layer of strategy that you need to consider on top of your battles. One thing I dislike is that very often the orbs for certain events are based around certain characters. For instance, doing a lot of damage in a launch is really easier if you have Sid in your party, which means that it's a gacha game, so they're going to try and get you to roll on Sid, even though you technically don't need Sid to win. I find that the Lufenia Plus period, which is now the highest difficulty of content, which is what this is a Lufenia Plus mission, doesn't necessarily require the character that it's based on, but it certainly helps. This is also why I called in a friend's... now there's 2 Sid Reigns out there. I called in a friend's Sid Reigns so that I can give him rainbow damage too, and we can just start going to town on this enemy. Why do I want to do that? Because I have 65 turns to win, and Lufenia Plus missions are kind of fucking bullshit. I don't know if I like them, because all they are Lufenia missions where you have to deal with an orb, which is something you had to do anyway, but now the enemy can mitigate your damage a ton. They have ways to reduce your brave gain by 80%. They have more HP. They have so much more defense. It's supposed to be very challenging, and it is. And I think clearing this fight was satisfying. I think this is one of the few mobile games where I like solving the puzzle of each battle quite a bit, but Lufenia Plus is very strict, and my big fear is that it's really going to revolve around getting the right characters for the right thing, as opposed to, Lufenia, the last difficulty tier of it, you didn't necessarily need the best character. You could get by with some ragtag teams. You could do, I'm in a Discord for this game, and they would do special challenges where they're like, only use characters that, you can't use any characters that buff this amount or XYZ. Here it feels like there's not as much room to experiment, and I find that kind of sucks. I like games when I'm able to sort of explore the possibility space, whether that's, seeing if I can escape a map in an exploration game, or in the case of an RPG combat system, to test the boundaries and limits of what I'm capable of doing in that system. Lufenia Plus makes that a little harder. And also, it makes the fights a little more gimmicky, like, because I need to launch to handle the orb, and because when they, you saw right there, the enemy hits certain thresholds, they will trigger different things. In that case, it was took an offensive posture and storing nutrients. When they take an offensive posture, they gain 300% damage dealt bonus, which means if they hit me, I'm screwed. They take 70% HP damage taken, except during launches, for whatever reason. They're immune to turn delay. If Zidane was out there, he can't delete their turns. They gain a shield. They gain all these buffs. Storing nutrients means that they get more maximum brave, so their attacks can hit even harder. The only way to dispel that is to launch them into the air and do 200k HP damage. Now, I have characters that make that possible, but I think the structure of this mission is really rigid, which is to say that it's exciting getting in under the wire, really doing the DPS race can be fun. Otherwise, I wouldn't be posting this and sharing it, but it does mean that the optimal method is launching, because launching will dispel the enemy auras. It will make sure that the orb is going up. So if somehow you lack characters that can launch, and you lack characters that can also do damage well in that launch period, then you're kind of fucked. Now, granted, this isn't content that you need to complete in order to, say, continue the story mode, which is actually fun. The story mode is a lot of, it's all the Final Fantasy characters interacting, so, like, name a weird group interaction, and you can probably think of it. It's like, there's one where Steiner meets Vanille and Fang from FF13, and he's like, oh, you must be good friends, and you're like, Steiner doesn't know what gay people are. This is what a normal burst looks like, by the way. I made sure to call in Setzer's rainbow damage thing here, so I can make sure I'm doing a fair amount of extra damage here, because without that rainbow damage to help max out my Brave, my characters would be doing piss poor damage. It's one of the things I actually, again, like, I have... The jury is out for me for Lufenia Plus. They're not impossible. I think I can crack the codes. I have a decent collection of cool characters that tend to fit into the challenges so far. I'm sure there will be one where I go like, fuck, I just can't do it. And you only really get like special end game, weapon materials and things like that. So you don't really need to do it to participate in the story, or even to participate in the majority of the content. This is like the top iceberg of a tip of the content. This is like the top 2% of the content, right? I think there's only even been 2 Lufenia Plus missions. But I'm trying to manage a lot of things here. So I do think it's exciting. It's like I'm trying to make sure that I'm resetting that burst period, so when Zidane attacks, he'll end up giving people Brave because he's stealing elixirs. I'm making sure to reapply Setzer's rainbow damage so that our damage doesn't fall off, because we only have the 65 turns. I'm making sure to keep track of Sid Rain's buff that allows him to do extra damage at the end of his own launches. You're juggling a lot of things, and you're also keeping track of HP thresholds. We're at 30% HP on this monster, and now they get something which is regenerative powers rising further, which means they gain regen. They gave Brave regen. So if for some reason I wasn't able to do a lot of damage, they'd be getting health back. In this case, the solution will be to launch them in the air again and do 200k HP. I have called in a summon, which is Pandemonium. Pandemonium allows me to do a little bit of extra Brave damage when I'm launching enemies into the air. So I'm using that right now to make sure that my launches are doing as much damage as possible. The first time I did this Lufenia and I completed it successfully, I did it in like 77 turns. The DPS check is real. Like it's very intense. And you really need to engage partially maybe in a little bit of trial and error, but you actually need to really look at the mechanics and plan out how you're going to do it, which again I think is good, but I also worry, my big worry is that it's going to be really stringent and that it's going to be really character dependent, and where I used to have fun with a slightly more freeform game, it's going to become a little bit more linear, which would be disappointing. As it stands, though, this is a satisfying challenge, and it's scary because I'm going to end up lucking out a little bit. You saw I brought out Warrior of Light again to give myself some shields. I keep on launching to do damage. It's probably the most damage I can do. 400k, 500k, under the right circumstances, 700. I've hit 1 million before. I'm trying to see how much damage I can pour out before this enemy can hit that guaranteed turn. Because you see where it says A on the turn marker down there? If it has that little jagged line frame thing around it, it means we can't delay it, we can't stop it. the enemy is going to attack. And I need to survive because also, in addition to the turn count, the high damage, the fact that the monsters prevent you from generating most of your resources, another thing is that if you take a certain amount of HP damage, you fail the mission. You can't have characters get knocked out at all. And in this case, I think the most amount of damage I can take is 7,000 HP or something, which means that one wrong attack, unless I have a means to heal it back up, which this team doesn't really have a lot of ways to heal, I think it only has one, maybe, means that if I get hit by this attack and somehow the shield doesn't hold, then I'm fucked. In this case, shield mostly holds. And you can see I can double check there what my HP was. I took about 5,300 something damage, and I can only take 7,000, which means, again, if I take pretty much any more damage, if I get hit one more time at all, then I probably fail the mission. And it doesn't matter how great my DPS was. It doesn't matter that I was managing my resources correctly. It doesn't matter that I was keeping track of my buffs. It doesn't matter I was keeping Setzer's rainbow damage up so we could do a lot of damage. Doesn't matter that I was making sure Zidane was stealing elixirs so we could keep getting more energy. It doesn't mean, it doesn't matter that I was keeping track of Sid's ability to do extra damage at the end of his turns. If I'm unlucky, then that's it. So you really have to plan out your approaches in these fights, which means that victory can be rewarding, but it also does mean that there are times where, like, even on like normal Lufenia missions, I've lost with like a character having 1%. Good news is the enemy missed. Isn't that great? That is the luckiest thing in the world. I don't know if the shield would have held. I think Setzer probably would have died there. Which means I would have gotten down to 10% with, maybe a little less than 20 turns left, plenty of time to do damage if I kept up the pace, and then if Setzer gets nuked by some random magic spell and I have to fucking do the whole thing over, it's really strict. Kind of ties into my fear that Lufenia Plus will become this thing where if you don't have the perfect composition, you will not be able to complete them. Older content, older difficulty tiers, that was less of a concern. They certainly had missions that were built around like the newest character, but the thing I liked about Dissidia that made me feel really comfortable playing it, is one of the same reasons I feel comfortable playing Genshin, which is to say, Genshin isn't a game that requires you to have any specific character. Like, what are you gonna do the Spiral Abyss? Nobody cares about that stuff, except the people on YouTube who are like, here's how to maximize your damage when going inside of the Spiral Abyss. Like, nobody cares. Like, you play that game to run around and collect orbs and enjoy the story, which is actually surprisingly good. You play Dissidia for the occasional challenging boss fight and also to see your favorite Final Fantasy Muppets have comedy routines or interesting drama routines, right? Like what happens when you put Kuja in a room with Golbez or something. My big fear is that Lufenia Plus will require you or more greatly incentivize you to really focus on chasing characters or things like that, which I feel would be antithetical to the way that this game was designed, because this was a game where I felt pretty comfortable talking to people about it, and even recommending it. Good luck again, by the way. That attack from that monster missed. But as you can see, the amount of mitigation that's happening here means that it's harder and harder for our launches to do the amount of damage we need in order to keep the orb going up. We're reaching the end of our rope. This should be enough here. That's enough there for sure. I don't know why the orb doesn't move. No freaking clue. But we've run out of options. The enemy has missed twice. I don't think they're going to miss a third time. I have no real guarantee that the shields are going to work, so I'm trying to build up for a big attack, which means on that launch, I'm not even doing a lot of damage. I'm mostly spending it to gain Brave, so that, and I'm double checking that Sid Reigns has his buff, because now when he attacks, he's going to give everybody a little bit of Brave. Now they have a little bit of more from the action we took before. I'm racing the clock. The orb is dropping, although we managed to get it back up. And the next enemy attack will probably end this run. So we need to do damage quick. But the amount of mitigation that the enemy has is bananas, right? Like, 38k. It's like, in the old days, maybe that's good. A 14k, it's like, that's nothing, right? We need to do hundreds. We need to really deliver right now, or we're absolutely screwed. Thankfully, we keep pace, and I think this might kill. Yeah, so Lufenia Plus. A fun challenge, an interesting puzzle, very strict to the point that I hope it doesn't change this game into something where you're really required to be optimal, where you can't experiment as much, because I do like this game. I wanted to show this off, though. Tough boss fight, interesting boss fight, gave me a chance to talk about something other than fighting games or Deathloop or whatever. I'm going to show off the team that I used. Probably not the most optimal team, but here we go. Well, also, I'm going to collect my rewards for a minute. I did this to make sure. I was like, did I actually complete it? And the answer is yes. I get some cool magic doodads. And now my team, for anybody curious if you've gotten this far, for like all 2 people who give a shit. Nobody watches my YouTube channel, but I do like posting on it. We have Zidane with his Burst Plus. These are his spheres, some debuff stuff, some HP stuff, bonuses when he gives debuffs. This is Sid Reigns, bonuses when he's at full health. This is Setzer. He has no spheres. Here we go, that's it. Bye.